Here's a little snippet of how the track rolls up from the intro and starts and drops, and then we're going to break down the parts of it. Alright, so let's begin with the drums overall and the different elements that come together to make the overall break. Now the overall break, if we go into our bus right here, which sounds like this. And there's a couple of variation parts to this, obviously, where we've got some different top ends stripped out and put in. And some different patterns in top end as well. But the four fundamental things that make it a drum break, they're all still present and there. Let's just give ourselves a nice looped section. And beginning with, we've just got a kick, and it is a very simple kick, just chopped from a break. If we zoom ourselves right in, we can see an important factor here. It's a little fade off at the end. Because we've chopped it out of a break initially, there's sometimes little pops and clicks. Just make sure that's gone. So we just put a little fade in there. And in Logic, we can just go up here to our little hot corners and just drag that out, or do it from the inspector. Over here you can see the fade in, fade out 19. So our kick's just a big weighty guy that fills in the bottom end. But I've done something a little bit cheeky on here, and you might notice it on the channel itself. The very first thing in there is pitch correction. Kind of odd, I'll give you that. So it really worked in this track to have the drums tuned 1 octave apart. You've got a musical element there with the kick reinforcing on that note in the lower end, and then the snare, and they're just constantly going between those 2 notes. It makes it really musical, especially when everything balances in with the chords and other notation. Always being in tune, always being musical, always sitting in the right space to give us the space to do that, because if the kick's slightly out of tune. So if we have a look on the track here, you could absolutely tune the drums using the transpose fine tune or do it in a sampler. However, the updated pitch correction tool in Logic just did the job really, really well. It nails it down, it does it immediately. It's got a tolerance of 1 cent, and it was just doing exactly what we needed. So let's switch it off, and there's our kick. Here it is tuned. It's vastly different, right? It's completely pitched. It's nailed on F. It doesn't get to wobble away from F whatsoever. Now we can adjust our response time and have it so it pulls into F. And that would still work, but honestly, that immediate tuning just works for this kind of vibe. And then with the EQ, there's nothing major going on, just taking out the subs and making sure there's room there for the sub with some little wobbly end. Everything else is just left, it's just cut from the break as it is. And then limiting, I'm pushing it into a limiter for the character of the limiter, so a little bit of saturation on the top. So literally gain 2, but down 1, that's all. It's giving it 1 dB of push into a limiter, just for the character it adds. Check it out. Yeah, just gives it that kind of soft clipping feel. And yeah, when we listen to that kick on its own, it's dead weird. I'll definitely give you that. But when we put the 2 together, we get that musical harmony, and it very quickly snaps in your ear, and you understand that there's a musical rhythm happening there. Today's video is sponsored by DistroKid. They let me get my music out to all of the major distributors, and they do that at a price an independent artist can easily afford. If you're ready to get your music or beats out there and want to release an unlimited amount of music each year, check the link in the description below for a discount off of your first year of unlimited distribution with DistroKid. I mean, it kind of works, but it's just not that super in tune, dialed in vibe. So we put the picture in, and it's actually musical, right? And you can see I've done the same thing here with the snare, snapped right into F, so the fundamental triggers on F. In terms of the channel EQ, just rolled off a bit higher up, and you can see the fundamental there, and that's what's being tuned really by the pitch correction. And then there's a gain control on here, just taking it back 1.5. All right, so we've got a musical kick and snare. That's the first 2 things. Then we got the Think topper. The character of drum and bass is that think break, a little bit more pitched down in like the Kino kind of vibe. So we've been able to leave it alone quite a lot, taking out basically all the low end, and it is just like the pure shaky tops and the little vocal sound that just locks your ear in. You get, yep, this is a D&B tune. You know it right there. So now these tuned in with it, and we're getting our break vibe already. Now you see there's a whole load of lines cut through the think topper here, and some bits are greyed out and some bits are white. That is basically because I've shuffled it around and I've moved the groove a little bit away from its original think vibe. It snapped a little bit more into the grid. It's a little bit more precise than it was. Yeah, we kind of lose that initial feel that the think has where it swings a bit, but for everything going in this tune, it being so big and wide and hard hitting, we need that precision. So we've just done that in there, and that's why all those lines are there. And that is done using flex and slicing mode just over here. And then on top of that, we've got a quick sampler, and we've just got a hat in there, and it's literally just this super long hat sample getting triggered, and that just sits along the whole top, just ticking along quite nicely. Really simple pattern look. If we open you up, so just with the think break, and our nice musical kick snare. And then I've used the Bluebird rides just to ride along the top. And give some live feeling to it, as you'll very much hear in pretty much all the Kino tunes. And as for the little change up here, I've used a separate drummer track to create this crash hit. That's just a little signifier, you know, we've changed from one thing to another. And there's a little ramp here. Speed down into that crash and start the break again. So. And when the break comes back in, we've got a shaker. So we add another layer onto that top end. That's essentially it for the breaks. The rest of it is all arrangement wise and like a couple of subtle changes and making things like this. Just let us know parts in the track are changing and altering. So then we come on to the instrumentation in the track, and this is where like a Kino tune shines more than anything else. So if we take our inst bus here, you'll see that will highlight. If we take our inst bus here, you'll see that will highlight these tracks right here. And if we leap over this section here, which I'd probably describe this as being the hook, we've got a big top lead and our main chords. We've got some alternating things going on with that. When we move further into like the first verse, we start adding some strings in. And then when the top lead comes in as well, we wanted to keep the strings, but we had to strip the chords back on the strings and just go to single note, just because that big lead and everything's so huge. So here we're down to single notes. And when we come back out of that hook, we can bring all the strings back. And on the breakdown intro section, we've got this nice pad that layers in with the chords just to help thicken everything up and build it up. As there's a tonality and texture. And into the second verse, we've got a nice chord layer to add an extra melody in. And we only use it that once, just like, hey, this is a whole new section, this is a whole new sound, enjoy it kind of thing. And then we rinse and repeat from there. Back into. So let's have a look at the chords overall. I've labeled it right at the start here because some of these change. I've got different velocities. So I've done like chorus plus velocity plus melody, etc. So you kind of know what's what in all the different variations. And then the very first one here, you've got F, E, F, D5, D7. And that's our chord structure breakdown, which seems overly complex, right? Rather than like 2, 3 or 4 chords, it's a keynote tune. We have to go a lot deeper. Let's have a look at what we've got here. So it's a relatively complex looking structure, but what it really is a chord structure with notes chopped out to create melody and overlapping chords at the same time. Yeah, so chord, 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 melody in this second section here, chord, chord, melody, chord, chord. And we play on that later when we add the extra melody layer in here, where we're harmonizing with the chords, but really making sure we accent the melody look. So there's parts of each chord in there, but the melody is what kind of comes out of the chords here in this aspect. So you can really hear that here. And the pads in the intro harmonize up in the same way. It's the same chord structure, but if you notice when we switch over to the standard chords, the melody isn't there in the pads. We stick with it being a chord structure. So they still work together, but we're not trying to make a melody out of pads. It's creating a sound bed for everything else to sit on top of. And then the top lead does the same thing as the chord lay in that it is purely melody. But the important thing about the top lead is that it sticks out at all times. So that particular sound we built out in RetroSynth. I think it's named as one of my patches. Yeah, simple wavy lead, right? And it is a simple wavy lead at the end of the day, with some simple effects on it. End verb, fat effects, and channel EQ taking out all the low end. Without those, barely hear it, right? End verb on. That gives it some space in the mix. It's now isolated in its own little space. This does the hard work. And channel EQ just there, ensuring we got nothing down there when we don't need it. Just, we only ever want this part of the lead. It never needs to be fat. That's a super simple structure to put those together. Arctic Sun is an Alchemy preset. We've just done some basic mixing on it. One of the most important things with it is such a big chord structure that we've got the FET side compressor set up so that whenever the kick hits, just knocks it back a few dB. Because it's being all these chords and melody, it takes up a huge amount of frequency in the overall mix. And we can see that with channel EQ. It's covering basically the whole spectrum. Even though I've rolled it off here, we're still dipping it back just to give that space to the kick, and help it kind of accent out by ducking this back for a moment. And then I suppose we look at the bass. It's actually only one bass, but you'll see I've named it Reese Mid and Reese Side, and that's because of the way I've made it so huge. You can't argue that's a huge Reese. Not particularly complex, made this one in ES2. I did a tutorial on this years ago. It's the same principle as that. I'll make sure it's linked in the description. And there's just loads and loads of processing to take it up to that kind of level, basically. So if we turn those off, there it is. And there's just the mid section of it. Put fat in. Compressor and limiter. As you probably guessed, mid is just the mids. It sounds completely mono when we play it back, and that is the case. I'm using gain here to make it mono. We know it's in mono, we can hear it, it's mono compatible, happy days. And it's not being knocked back on the channel, it's them knocking the whole bass back. I've got two separate compressors here. It's being knocked back by both the kick and the snare on the bus overall. You could do it on just the mid if you want to keep the sides in as well, but I liked it pumping as a whole. Now the reason I've done this is because this Reese was kind of huge. I wanted it to be huge, but when we summed to mono, it would disappear entirely. So we've made a duplicate of it, and this will now always be here as a mid, and then we've got our sides. It really helps bring it out. Over here on the master, and we flip to mono, we've now still got our mid, but all our sides disappear. So we've still got a nice Reese bass if it is in mono, if it gets summed to mono, but in stereo is how we want to hear it, and it's still there. And that's why we've split the two up like that. Because if we had just the one Reese bass as those big sides split out, we lose basically everything without having a separated mono version like that. How on earth have I created that so it works like that? It comes down to this linear EQ at the end, basically. And if we open them up, all the low end here is in the mid, and I've used a linear EQ on both, so we've got no phase correlation and no phase issues between the two. All the Reese high end is over here, all the low gritty bass is on the mid section. So it's still there, and then when we sum the two together over here, we've still got some of that high distortion left, but this is never going to cause an issue and phase issue because we've got everything over here just looking after itself. That's probably the only valid time to use linear EQ in that kind of situation. And what we could do as well is do a roll off right on the sub here, just like that, and get rid of that wobble right down there, because we don't need it. Our fundamentals up here, we could just protect that a little bit more like so, and have even less issues show up. In terms of the bass design, and then everything else is basically ear candy from there. I've used the No Good vinyl sample from Logic, along with this funky break at the start, and the Arcade Dreams noise sweep, and again I've stretched it out to make a double riser. Just reverse them like this. Bit of tape delay and we're golden. That comes together to give us the really nice intro section that rises right up into the main drop.